Hello. Excuse me. I apologize. What a way to start a live video, huh? Because I was rushing. Spring is there is complete possession over the human fact treatment nature regarding how nature has complete possession over it, relevant to spring and relevant to where a breaching method that came from some ancient times before modern nations leaders note that were forced to entertain what couldn't be entertained, and the Constitution unabridged, other countries' equivalents. The hyper-native human science. I want to tell a story, for example, one time, true story. Normally, I will keep this private. See, there are complete possession of the sense and sensibilities of each age of fact treatment nature, relevant to where and how. A breaching method that can be personified, that can be taken, in other words, as a subject, as a devil is a subject with the nature of religions, for example, and where and how the nature of religion say things distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously from their books. And their books' treatments, their stewards of them have subjects' treatments and the relativity of it distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously, leaving out two hyper and increasingly relevant things, like where and how the ancients and the semi-ancients, rather, at least we know that they were separated. I mean, they were influenced by, they were criminally foreign influenced, which is a phrase we need to use, that the breaching method knew we would need to use, blaming negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures that it caused and maintains, and keeps by keeping it maintained, blamed on other things, others, or selves, as itself another invisible but still discernible complete possession over the human syntax nature that is hyper-native pure. Now, this is one of the ways. Read Native American dreams, for example, as they say we should. We can best describe why and how they are distinctly from ourselves. We're the same human volume science, so why should they be distinctly, increasingly valued as a distinction? Because it goes with where and how our founders were also fact nature enslaved by the breaching method. That is a human fact nature breaching method before our founders were even born. It was entrenched with slavery in North America and in South America. It had no unity capable of being, and had unity being forced simultaneously to keep syntax uses of words like independence and of unity simultaneously leveraged against, in defenses of their logic. A, therefore, B, how they get away with pretending that the nature of the law has been spoken for, or had been spoken for, relevant to subject treatment with even Jim Crow laws, including encounters, because where black and white has to be used, it was applied like it was assigned values that had nothing to do with it by the breaching method. that knew how nature has manifest actually are answered, the answers. And those questions that are actually going to come up. Relevant to, in other words, this is a breaching method that is wire crime acts and methods and rolls with it from off campuses, which is simultaneously and from off interbranch locations. The only reason this hasn't been countered is not just because all identities of corruption and insidious positive treatments were in collusion as those laws, as breaching laws with database relationships that were being checked. Was, in other words, that's why and how they had slavery sickly distinctly in the North and South, because no one understood how non-distinctly. And that was maintained, the outcome, by maintaining other motivations, nature's needs, interests, needed pretended, by only capable of being what it maintains, but simultaneously multi-front. Uses of ground locations as fact treatment nature, as uses of fact treatment nature, tactical interior from where and how we are hyper. We have there is an identity of hyper relativity that is simultaneously one thing. It is constantly is the value of that which is hyper simultaneous, and the needs to discern the hyper simultaneous, not just per theory, but as theorem, because and how there are that how being an individual is as a sequence nature / as a simultaneous nature simultaneously. So the species body is made up of a whole bunch of different bodies, individual. And so grouped are bodies. And where this is fact treatment nature, they have subjects treatments where they have sequence shifts involved. Next to the Connecticut State Capitol, they have recorded uses of culturally charged, sexually charged individuals. That time where people are going to be may take a picture and then pretend they know the person. They make context where the only three branches of government in every country, and then countless names, retired, standing. There was complete possession over the fact treatment nature now, separated, not just Native American history was forced conformed, criminally foreign influenced. That which had been revealed by the human species working together in ancient times. Prepare your minds, because this is more probable and more practical. And denials of it also demonstrate this too. In other words, exception nature that appears to be in demonstration of others, actually in demonstration of the same thing. So that's what they do. They're making exceptions preemptively, where people were in the same location, but they don't know them. They sought them out specifically to where simultaneously. First, we have to understand differential criminal foreign influences, because it was also used remotely, increasingly, where that is also manifest as complete uses of all natures of collusions already self-valued, being and having been already fit to all identity of the ground, locations and instances, relativity, relationships. So there is an identity of relativity, but countries individually grouped and together have theories on relativity and simultaneously with physical delusions. For example, offensively affront and for apparent motivations, nature's needs, interests, but all that is used remotely for worse. and its uses of all ground locations. And so this is about sequence. This is about the perception of the 5 identities of sequence nature, how grouped, which is simultaneously as 3 identities of sequence nature, how grouped by and as, how the cell is cell nucleus, cell body, cell wall, as 3 distinct identities of relationship to, while as, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously, that with no the value of the water and gases, the elements, and the shared cell walls. And those 3 manifest states of chloroplast with the cells of a tomato plant, for example. So humanity, the spring, the identity. The way I started this video, I should be more presentable too. The spring, this is no one has spoken about properly since ancient times, because of the nature of the methods, plural by the one singular, fact, treatment, nature oriented, predicate acts, delivery system method, wrongdoing, delivering system method, and sequence shifts and simultaneous value denial method, as the denial of the relativity of where and how there is an identity of relativity that is discernibly hyper-conjunctive and hyper-conjunctive to our fact, treatment, nature, qualities, and aspect individually grouped and together. So the 3 branches of government and the countries individually grouped and together to maintain positions capable of doing investigations and things when they need to figure out things at all locations, know increasingly since founding many ways. All exceptions, exception nature, and demonstration of the same thing. Know how a criminal insidiousness is going to use truth. In other words, how truth was used to lie. When people would pretend they're for the Constitution on a bridge, there were still roles with that which was left entrenched, north and south, which were a whole bunch of multi-front employments and fact, treatment, nature oriented, A, therefore B, possessions of the ground that has nothing to do with anything that could be invented. We could be systems other than its own, but it's going to show negative value, nature, progressions, action, natures, and demonstration of it. So this breaching method, the devil, the proverbial devil, slash shaitan, distinctly, not distinctly, and simultaneously. The species body has a voice. The sounds have a better than identity of living, better than living identity of relationships to themselves. For example, English is revealed to teach how one identity of volume, before any physical identity of volume had ever been generated, one identity of sequence slash simultaneous nature as an identity of forever nature, its value progression, its increasing value of its complete identity. It stays as a sequence slash simultaneous nature, more finite than anything ever generated, than the smallest detail. And the value of that distinctly, non distinctly, and simultaneously stays as the value of the order of the finite. So there are these small details that we can only better than control one way, /s. It is generating more to everything in demonstration of it. All exception is your see why and how we go to space. The known motivations to self-value that. It was and is coupled with remote uses of that. And that is where not non-distinctly how modern countries each were the victim of the same breaching method is not discerned. And even if you say, well, it's not, it is more also in demonstration of it, it is more probable and more practical to counter all the overt / insidious demonstrations that modern countries self-value, how all these ways hidden, how there are demonstrations that all locations, areas, and states are tactically denatured. They are way below the means that we have and could afford it as factory nature that has nothing to do with economic value systems as agreed to. Those agreements left out exceptions in exception nature, leveraged against each, specifically to keep no matter how powerful a leader could get, or forced to entertain insidious positive and negative treatments and collusion against all identities of the ground's voicings, natural, hypernatural, which is hypernative. See, what would have been revealed by that system better than perfect and making more perfect had then been hurt, tricked, persuaded, taken as shock and awe, quote, shock and awe, unquote. This is relevant to what is hyper evidential is capable of being used. And what is hyper evidential and is actually recorded is how remote possession /s of the defenses of positive and negative treatments with convictions, with opinions, and that is / opinions. Because here where physics, metaphysics, and identity are bound, it is also where and how our quality of fact nature, it is functional, where and how there are distinct identities of invisible but still discernible, such as the value of sequence truth as it actually unfolded before the order of the finite now, before the order of the finest, the smallest finite detail about the body of the republic for which we stand, an identity of the ground conjunction piece, criminally re-engineered. And so, for example, it is more probable and is more practical to convict and or to theorize that therefore the ancient gaming system, because the evolution only feels like games, because that real evolution science reveals evolution's fruits, gifts, means out of nowhere. So in other words, there are things that came up simultaneously that I realized I couldn't tell a member of Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Museum. And therefore the identity of volume, even if a person's 1/100th I mean, it can't be one of them. Partially, whatever, Native American. The reason Native American tribes individually grouped and together are an increasing value only is because nature itself is demonstrating to us we're the hyper-native educational system, and it uses with the ground where it was really relative to our syntactic nature. Like, for example, there are proofs that nature uses of the beaver, different things. It would show humanity how to make, how they could get more of what they need. What do people want? Fresh fish. Negative out. Look at the sea. The surface of the sea can't help but stay beautiful. But we have to. The consciousness knows under the sea, all kinds of plastic junk is going in there. Negative nature progressions have only been going, and the causes of them were the whole time being and haven't been blamed on other things, others ourselves, because a whole bunch of NAVE, KNAVE positions and natures were criminally legalized. This is one of the things that everybody was prevented uses of, that which is hyper-evidential at all interbranch locations, and increasingly, sickly distinctly at all locations. Sickly distinctly, not distinctly, and simultaneously. That is exploited, and that is increasingly how hyper-simultaneously. And this is where and how we are fact-cheaping nature. So the opinions of A through Z people, the opinions and convictions normalized, known what people say is legitimate, they are in collusion, differentially, criminally foreign influenced. The same way with the hyper-archetypal criminal enterprise, archetypal criminal enterprises, as countries A through Z, and transnational criminal foreign influences, only capable of being when you have countries A through Z still archetypal and used remotely. For example, recorded with and manifest when people make opinions about slavery. It is as shock and awe as it is applied functionally. The way it is of the breaching method is a function/functions, more so than how computers work. It adds the identity of the order of the finite more so than how computers work, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously, and then further, exactly how they work, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously. In other words, there are ways to describe where and how and why little kids could discern the lies and the physical delusions and the criminally foreign influence qualities of fact-cheaping nature, and how they got away with it and get away with it. Time treatments used simultaneously, too fast, too slow, and leaving out and having left out the significance of details, like where and how. Nobody understands where and how. Our founding parents were fact-cheaping nature slaves. They had to hide their individual actual roles because everyone had been forced as independent bodies of corruption and insidious inclusion with positive treatments and nature's inclusion with it. Know how, like, in other words, how criminal insidiousness nature. I'm not a lawyer, not a police form, not criminal, not judge, not military. Lawyers were recorded using what is hyper-evidential, collusion with multi-front arrays of opinions that shared qualities of factual nature, aspects of factual nature, sequence shift self-value. When they were making legal treatments about anything, it was as systems tactical ulterior from the where and how. There is the complete possession as that which actually revealed humanity, the way we actually are, volume science. See, they're offensively pretending, measuring and maintaining collusion /S with the three branches, each age of their family member, as a certain type of hyper victims that are a certain type of where all victim reactions, factual nature wise, they were fit to collude against other innocent people, where how the A therefore B is fit. And having, and this is saying how, in other words, the breaching method knew that correlation would give inherent active and progressive meaning to every individual. Discern to you how positive and negative simultaneously, positive treatments and negative treatments are being used to obfuscate and hide revelations that come from where and how. Discernment of things positive and negative simultaneously are valued. So the Oscars, for example, and the Academy Awards, they are being and having been employed by police forms and by judges and by politicians. Those are only three branches of government that have, and there are exceptions in exception nature tied to them. For example, themselves, relevant to the people who answer the phones. And like with schools, they have wire crime acts and methods where they have descriptions of how parents respond to schools where they are involved with corruption that is criminally legalized. And where even it has to be because for good reasons, because no one's been watching. In other words, they have complete possession over all the elements of over various natures of organized crime since founding, pounding drums, and the other countries do, and they share kids here and there. Ours do, in other words. And note too, where and how subjects treatments like wars bring up the people involved with the physics. And when they have exception nature treatments, they're in demonstration of the same thing. All of them are bridged from what and how nature is telling us to use. The identities of the words, the identities of definitions. So we have people lying about short words as experts who increasingly have to self-value, where now countless campuses of each age and nature have been abridged. And in other words, that's increasingly self-valued by people that are valuing them abridged because they were not just per reasons known, trained through systems to training teachers of the campuses, teachers of the sciences that left and leave out, you know, where sequence shifts, tide illusions, natures of finite active progressive lies, illusions, and motivations, and denials of the value of what is simultaneous and actually recorded, and actual relevant to uses of people's names, their own, other people's, including the uses of titles. And a title means the A, therefore B. people aren't supposed to follow on improper laws or orders. See, but a certain type of victim predator was made as roles with the 5 identities of criminal insidiousness. Hyper-archetypal, transnational. I mean, archetypal as countries, transnational, interstates, and that insidiousness with A through Z, also not realized as styles that pretend they don't understand people, and that really don't understand people because, as the experts, they're not capable of using premises treatments honestly and or without criminal foreign influences. And they offensively also need to pretend for motivations other, where and how they know this is true and they know it is discernible. And see that when the breaching method knew they would have to do that at locations. They built with types of experts to respond to types of instances and instances of involvements reported by police. Now, see, and by people associated with the courts, individually grouped and together. So, in other words, where they're individually supposed to be independent, they never had independence, and where they're supposed to be grouped, they never had unity. Because the identity of the law, the nature of the law, is other and uses other, our qualities and aspects of its grammar system. So the word the definite article, the only definite article, there is something that know how the definite article and the indefinite article, a and an, are the indefinite articles. Know how the definite finite is at the root of both definite and indefinite. Finite. So definite, definite. Finite, smallest detail. No space in existence are distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously the same thing. And no space / existence as a conception made by nature, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously, where and how the invisible but still discernible is space when we see exceptions in exception nature and demonstration of the same thing. Where and how physics is temporary / lasting. And where and how one of the things, so there is an order of sequence, truth before the order of that which is individually grouped and together, bound here now. How and every part of itself, therefore. So something stayed greater simultaneously too big and too finite to be. The smallest detail is ever generated. The hyper-simultaneous is one of the things it is. This is one of the things it is constantly. Why we need and how it shows us nature and honesty regarding it. Nature is a relativity to positive and negative simultaneously. Identity. Its hyper-identity is further positive or negative onto itself. but per a system that uses means to show how to make positive value nature progressions that is increasingly incapable of being because of remote uses of roles with fake exceptions and exception nature made to employ syntactically, humanity defending syntactically what we could not and cannot defend, and afford functions by the Constitution unabridged simultaneously. And real justice, wherein how it must satisfy all appearances of real justice. The phrase, the perfect world, unquote, was used to where they use this phrases and words criminally, the people involved, as reactions to, even as our leaders, for example, and as the people, overt criminal enterprises. In other words, so there are those 5 identities of criminal insidiousness per this method of simultaneously expressing and solving. 2, for example, in other words, the spring is the identity of the other seasons, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously. What is being presented to us is nature's identity of relationship to itself, and the value of that only increasing distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously. So, for example, to discern that which is constantly positive to the individual, how grouped and how species body /S. It's the discernment. We have to discern hyper-simultaneous. They revealed this. This is what humanity wasn't invented. We were revealed. Everybody is it distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously, though. So we have an extent that is distinct, simultaneously, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously. And this extent is showing how hyper-simultaneously, which value progression here that is also positive unto itself as Earth's distinct, non-distinct, and simultaneous / hyper-simultaneous difference relative to the rest of space / existence. To explain this and use it properly, it is relative to its identity of value progression. The identity of the 1/3/5 identities of order / order, hypernatural. So already this method had employed short words and revelations at the youngest ages and at the highest, best campuses, all natures of campuses, including fire campuses, medical campuses, and private locations that have nothing to do with that, things people don't even realize campuses, research campuses, all originally still employed criminally foreign influence, specifically too, per needs by motivations apparent, because the method knew that nature itself would be demonstrating to each age of correlation nature, which has the 5 invisible but still discernible distinct identities of order and the hyper-conjunction to answer our questions better than calculators could answer questions, better than computers could. So boxing has stood, but give it rest. I tell best. In other words, there is one way to fight where we use qualities of faction. Nature wants everywhere it wants. The spring is the possession of a window relevant to what's going to let us bring evolution's fruits, gifts, means out of nowhere. See, this is tactically denatured, though. Dependencies upon other countries were forged apart with the forging of roles, with that which is so sick. But everyone, and specifically to cause logic and natures that would say, oh, but we didn't cause it. See, logic that's differentially criminally foreign influence, used remotely, though. And so it built all these natures individually grouped and together used remotely. And for another engineering that had already been natural, but it had been already blamed on other things, others themselves, into themselves at all locations. So not only has not one branch of government been independent, and or nor have they been unity. Every member of their body, every individual grouped and together, all private tied to them. Same thing with overt criminal enterprises. The same thing with private ones originally instilled. They confessed, bulls with, and self-valued when they were defending themselves. So subjects treatments are brought before the legal bodies, as branches are, to measure and maintain by the breaching method that everyone didn't discern, all sickly, non-distinctly, and distinctly too. And that's used to maintain the outcome. So in other words, reactions to it off the record, on the record, motivations tied to it. Oh, but I want to invest in the market and use it this way. I didn't cause that. They want to speak anyway, but then someone needs to have mandated law followed. They start needing. This is offensive, and after the fact, they can't need to keep simultaneously preemptively needed and libel aggressions needed by the bodies of the three bodies of government, so we can give a voice to them as a means through pantheism, hyper-pantheism, as a science, and a country give reliefs, and where spending is being and having been employed to keep self-value, identity, ground locations tactically by a breaching method against here or there. In other words, where America and where Ukraine and where Russia have the same impositions against us, the other countries involved do too. Everyone is incapable here or there of making subjects treatments properly, of using the words, the names of people properly, and of dealing with exceptions properly. So in other words, we're given expressions and opinions and convictions regarding these subjects treatments as how presented to us. These A, therefore, B logics with MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, the state's news people, what led up to that. Each age, nature, and campus, each age, nature of perception, each sense and sense is being having been employed. But that which knew would continue increasingly need to blame others, have others. No, while people are now actively blaming other things, others ourselves, for the real causes of negative body nature progressions, acts in nature, like wars, human species bleeding, and reactions to it as facts in nature. In other words, not one of them was capable of speaking for identity to begin with. This is a method that consciously is involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders, and people pretend, and where they plant fake evidences, also in the form of, in other words, if you recollect that you were in the spot, one of the various ages of only three branches of government, everyone tied to them and their sensibility. It's per method, or they already involved. You need to self-value and use, identities of natures of identity theft, fraud, slanders, instances, roles, and collusions, on and off locations with databases and campuses simultaneously, and with the overt criminal enterprises and private ones, kept needing to hide the same sequence shift, finding act progressive lies, actual uses of identity to the ground, locations, corners of streets.